Hi everyone, glad you made it. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
The first thing I heard was the steady beep of a heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Military hospitals always sound the same: controlled, efficient, quiet in a way that almost feels rehearsed. I was lying on a narrow bed in a recovery room at Walter Reed, wearing a patient gown and a thin blanket that felt like it came from a supply catalog printed in 1989. A small bandage wrapped around my left shoulder, a few bruises along my ribs, nothing serious. The car crash had looked worse than it actually was. According to the police report, my brakes had failed while I was exiting a parking garage. My car rolled forward, tapped a concrete divider, and the airbag deployed. That was it. No dramatic explosion, no flipping vehicles, just a clean little accident that sent me to a military hospital for observation. I knew exactly why it happened. My sister Charlotte had arranged it. I stared at the ceiling tiles and listened to the machine beside my bed. The monitor kept time like a metronome, calm, predictable. Then the door opened. Charlotte walked in first. She wore a Burberry trench coat that probably cost more than the car I had driven in college. Her hair was perfect, makeup flawless. She carried a slim leather folder under her arm, like she was walking into a board meeting instead of a hospital room. Behind her stood our father, General Arthur Hastings. He didn't sit down. He never did. He leaned against the wall near the door with his arms crossed, already looking annoyed that the world had dared to slow him down. Charlotte approached the bed with a soft smile that looked rehearsed. "Valerie," she said gently, "you scared us." I didn't answer. She set the leather folder on the rolling tray beside my bed and flipped it open. A stack of documents slid into view. "I talked with the hospital administration," she continued. "Since you're active duty, we can upgrade your TRICARE coverage so you get priority treatment if anything unexpected comes up." She pushed the papers closer. "It's just routine paperwork." My father checked his watch. "Sign it," he said without looking at me. "I have a meeting in 30 minutes. Charlotte nodded in agreement. "Dad's right, it's nothing complicated. Just a few authorizations." I slowly pushed myself up against the pillow. Charlotte handed me a pen. I didn't take it. Instead, I picked up the documents and began flipping through them one page at a time. Page 1, Basic Authorization. Page 2, Medical Disclosure. Page 3. That's where my eyes stopped. A small barcode sat at the bottom corner of the page. Most people wouldn't notice it. I did. Right above it was the document code, DD-2842, revised. Not insurance paperwork. Not even close. It was a comprehensive medical authorization form, the kind that allows a third party to make surgical decisions on your behalf. And buried inside the updated clauses was something even more interesting: voluntary living organ donation authorization. Charlotte watched my face carefully. I kept it blank. If she knew I recognized the form, she didn't show it. Instead, she leaned slightly closer and lowered her voice. "This just lets me coordinate with the hospital if you're ever unconscious," she said. "Standard stuff." Across the room, my father sighed. "Valerie, stop reading everything like a lawyer," he snapped. "Just sign it." I slowly turned another page. The language was clean, legal, carefully edited. If someone signed this, Charlotte would have full medical authority over them, including organ donation approval. I looked up at my sister. She smiled again. That same perfect smile she used when speaking at medical conferences. The smile of someone who believed she had already won. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I closed the folder. "All right," I said. Charlotte's shoulders relaxed just a little. She slid the pen across the tray. "Great," she said. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I reached into the small pocket sewn into the side of my hospital gown. The object I pulled out looked like a regular tactical pen. Black aluminum body, military issue. Charlotte frowned slightly. "That's unnecessary," she said. I ignored her. The pen had a micro camera embedded in the tip and a small cartridge containing a radioactive ink tracer, standard evidence tracking equipment used during certain investigations. I clicked it once. The tiny camera activated. I signed my name across the authorization line. Valerie Hastings. Clean signature, no hesitation. Charlotte's eyes lit up. She grabbed the papers immediately and flipped to the signed page to confirm it. "There we go," she said. Across the room, my father pushed off the wall. "Finally," he muttered. Charlotte stacked the documents neatly, slipped them back into her folder, and stood up. Her expression changed the moment she thought I wasn't watching. The concern disappeared. What replaced it was satisfaction, pure and simple. She leaned down briefly and kissed the air near my cheek. "Get some rest," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the door. My father followed her out without saying another word. The door closed behind them. The heart monitor kept beeping beside my bed. Beep, beep, beep. I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds. Then I reached over and disconnected the sensor from my finger. The machine continued its rhythm for a moment before switching to a soft alarm. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. No dizziness, no pain worth mentioning. I walked to the window and watched Charlotte cross the hospital parking lot below. Her black SUV waited near the entrance. She moved quickly, clutching the leather folder like it contained a winning lottery ticket. Inside that folder was the document she believed gave her legal authority over my body. What she didn't know was that the ink I used to sign it carried a microscopic radioactive marker, and the pen that captured the signature had already transmitted the footage to a secure military server. The moment Charlotte scanned that document, its location would become trackable. GPS, evidence chain, everything. Charlotte climbed into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away from the hospital entrance. She thought she had just secured control over my organs. She had no idea the signature she rushed out of this hospital with was about to guide the FBI straight to the operating room she planned to use as a slaughterhouse. Before I even left the building, the elevator doors closed behind me with a soft, metallic click. I swiped my access badge across the panel and watched the numbers on the display drop one floor at a time. Basement level 3, no windows, no cell signal, no outside world. Exactly the kind of place where uncomfortable truths tend to show up. 48 hours had passed since Charlotte walked out of that hospital room with my signature in her folder. I had checked myself out 12 hours after the observation period ended. The doctors cleared me with minimal paperwork. Apparently, a low-speed crash and a bruised shoulder didn't qualify as a life-threatening event. Charlotte hadn't asked questions. That was the interesting part. If she truly believed I was injured enough to sign over medical authority, she should have checked on me again. Instead, she went silent, which usually means someone thinks they already won. The elevator stopped. The doors opened into a narrow concrete hallway that led directly to the SCIF entrance. Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. The Department of Defense uses rooms like this when information cannot leave the building under any circumstances. No phones, no wireless signals, no outside networks, just isolated systems and people who know how to read them. 2 security officers stood by the reinforced door. One of them looked at my uniform and nodded. "Evening, Major." "Evening," I replied. I placed my badge on the scanner, then my palm, then a short retinal scan. The door unlocked with a dull mechanical sound. Inside the room was exactly how I left it 2 weeks earlier. A cluster of workstations arranged around a central console, multiple screens mounted on the wall. The lighting was low and tinted slightly blue to reduce eye strain during long analysis sessions. The place smelled like coffee and expensive electronics. I dropped my jacket over the back of a chair and sat down at the central terminal. The document Charlotte took from the hospital was already waiting in an evidence envelope on the desk. My signature sat near the bottom of page 3. The ink looked ordinary, it wasn't. I slid the page under the forensic scanner built into the workstation. The system hummed quietly while a thin beam of light passed across the paper. A progress bar moved across the screen. 10%, 30, 70, then the interface shifted. The radioactive tracer inside the ink activated the digital marker embedded in the document. Within seconds, the system linked it to the signal transmitted by the pen camera. Coordinates appeared on the screen. Charlotte's clinic, private surgical facility, registered as a cosmetic and outpatient practice, which was interesting because cosmetic clinics usually don't require multi-layer biometric authorization systems. I typed a few commands. The Department of Defense network connected to a classified investigative database. Within seconds, several encrypted files opened across my monitors. Medical licensing records, financial transfers, patient intake forms. I leaned back slightly in the chair and started reading. Charlotte Hastings, licensed surgeon, specialty transplant medicine, board certified, excellent professional reputation, no disciplinary actions. Everything looked clean, which is always suspicious. I opened another dataset, financial records. That's where things started getting interesting. Several large deposits had entered Charlotte's clinic accounts over the last 2 years. Each payment came from shell corporations registered in offshore banking centers. Cayman Islands, Malta, Luxembourg. Each payment was labeled as consulting services. Consulting, for a transplant surgeon. Sure. I opened the patient database next. The first few files looked normal, routine transplant candidates. But the deeper I went, the stranger the pattern became. Many of the donors listed in the records had the same background. Former military, retired service members. No immediate family listed in the system. And the outcome column on several of those files had one unusual phrase: post-operative complications, followed by a closed case notation. No follow-up appointments, no recovery data, just silence. I pulled the mortality reports. 3 names matched Department of Veterans Affairs records. All 3 had died during routine surgical procedures at Charlotte's clinic. No investigations, no lawsuits, no family members pushing questions, because there were no family members. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I opened the encrypted message logs linked to Charlotte's business account. One message thread was marked as priority. The sender was a private medical broker operating through a Swiss server. The recipient, Charlotte. The message history appeared on my monitor. Negotiation notes. Compatibility reports. Lab results. Then the final entry appeared. Recipient VIP client. Condition advanced liver failure. Urgency critical. Donor confirmed biological match. I felt my jaw tighten. The donor file opened automatically. Name Valerie Hastings. Blood type. DNA markers. Complete transplant compatibility. Estimated surgical date Friday, 2 days from now. I kept reading. The payment agreement appeared in the next document. Total amount $3 million, paid through a defense contractor holding company. I opened another financial record. The company belonged to a billionaire weapons contractor who had done business with the Pentagon for decades. The same man currently waiting for a liver transplant. I typed another search query. Arthur Hastings, my father. Several private gambling debts appeared in a classified financial monitoring report. $3 million owed to the same contractor. I sat there quietly for a moment. The math was simple. Charlotte wasn't planning to sell one of my kidneys. She was planning a full liver extraction. And the buyer already paid the deposit. Then another alert popped onto the screen. A new entry had just been added to the clinic's internal medical network. Timestamp 6 minutes ago. I opened the file. Patient status update. Name Valerie Hastings. Medical condition, clinical brain death due to complications from traumatic injury. Declared unresponsive. Recommended surgical recovery of viable organs. Estimated time of procedure. Friday morning. I stared at the line for several seconds. Charlotte had already written my obituary inside her system. According to her records, I was effectively dead. Convenient. I leaned forward and placed both hands on the keyboard. Across the room, the large wall monitors reflected the glow from the screens. My sister wasn't running a shady clinic. She was running a full black market organ operation. And the final product on her table this week was me. I opened another terminal window. A secure financial interface appeared. The system required multiple authentication steps. Password, biometric confirmation, internal authorization code. The account I accessed belonged to the billionaire contractor scheduled to receive my liver. One command line blinked at the bottom of the screen. Freeze global assets. My finger hovered above the key for a moment. My parents had just sold the body of their so-called disappointing daughter to pay off a gambling debt. But to complete the surgery, they still needed to get me onto Dr. Gordon's operating table. And right now, my finger was resting on the button that could shut down every bank account that man owned. My finger stayed above the keyboard for a few seconds before I slowly pulled my hand back. Freezing the billionaire's accounts right now would end the deal immediately. It would also warn Charlotte that something was wrong. People running illegal operations tend to disappear the moment money starts acting strange. I needed them comfortable, confident, still believing the plan was moving forward. So I left the account untouched, closed the financial terminal, and leaned back in the chair. Then my secure phone vibrated. Caller ID Arthur Hastings. Of course. I let it ring once before answering. Major Hastings, I said calmly. My father's voice came through the line with the same controlled tone he used during press briefings. Valerie, I need you at the house tonight. No greeting, no concern, straight to business. What for? I asked. A medical discussion, he replied. Your sister discovered something in your hospital records. I didn't say anything. Arthur continued, there appears to be a small tumor, nothing dangerous if handled quickly. Interesting. Charlotte had already upgraded my medical condition from brain-dead donor to emergency surgical patient. That was efficient. What kind of tumor, I asked. Charlotte will explain, he said. You should hear it directly from a doctor. A short pause followed. 7 o'clock, he added. Don't be late. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment, then slipped it back into my pocket. Right on schedule. 2 hours later, I pulled up to the gated entrance of my parents' house in Northern Virginia. Calling it a house was generous. It was a stone mansion sitting behind tall iron gates and a row of carefully trimmed hedges that looked like they were maintained by people with degrees in landscaping. The guard at the gate recognized my car and opened the entrance without asking questions. I parked near the front steps and walked inside. The interior smelled like polished wood and money. Charlotte was not there, only my father. General Arthur Hastings stood near the fireplace in the living room, wearing a dark sweater and holding a glass of bourbon. He turned as I walked in. Valerie, he said. His voice sounded warm, almost concerned. Anyone watching from the outside would probably think they were looking at a caring father greeting his injured daughter. I had known him long enough to recognize the performance. Dad, I said. He gestured toward the couch. Sit. I did. A small tray sat on the table between us with a teapot and 2 cups. Arthur poured tea into one of them and pushed it toward me. Earl Grey, he said. I picked up the cup and took a slow sip. Across the room, he studied my face carefully. You look better than the doctors described, he said. I heal fast, I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. That's good, because we need to act quickly. There it was. He sat down across from me and leaned forward slightly. Charlotte reviewed your imaging results from the hospital, he said. There's a small mass near your liver. I held the teacup steady. How small? Small enough that removing it now will prevent complications later. Where would this surgery happen? I asked. Arthur didn't hesitate. At Charlotte's clinic. Of course. He took a sip of his bourbon and continued speaking in the calm, reassuring tone people use when they want you to accept something unpleasant. You'll go in tomorrow night. Charlotte has already arranged everything with her surgical team. I set the teacup down on the table. That seems fast. Speed matters with medical issues, he said. I leaned back slightly in the couch. Interesting diagnosis, I said, considering the hospital cleared me 2 days ago. Arthur's expression hardened just a little. The military hospital doesn't have Charlotte's specialization, I see. He studied me for another moment. Then his tone softened again. Valerie, he said, quietly, you need to understand something. This family has always taken care of its own. There it was again, family. That word tends to appear whenever someone is about to ask you for something terrible. You're my daughter, he continued. Charlotte is your sister. Sometimes that means making sacrifices for the people who raised you. I didn't respond. He leaned forward. This procedure will protect your health and help your sister at the same time. Help her how I asked. Arthur's patience started thinning. You don't need every operational detail. The general had finally started speaking like a general. I picked up the teacup again and took another calm sip. While he talked, my right hand slowly rotated one of the brass buttons on my Class A uniform jacket. The button wasn't decorative. It contained a directional microphone linked to a CID recording unit. Every word in the room was now stored in a secure evidence file. Arthur didn't notice. Valerie, he said, his voice now slightly sharper. You've always struggled with loyalty. That was new. Have I asked. You question authority, he said. You question family decisions. That sounds like critical thinking. That sounds like insubordination. The warm father act was fading quickly. I placed the teacup back on the tray and looked directly at him. What happens if I say no, I asked. Arthur didn't blink. Then I remind you that I'm a 4-star general in the United States Army. There it was, he stood up slowly and walked closer. You are a major under my command structure, he said. If I determine that you are refusing a necessary medical directive that affects operational readiness, I can initiate a review of your service record, my career, my rank, my pension. He was putting everything on the table. Non-compliance could result in disciplinary action, he added calmly. I looked up at him. So your solution is to threaten your own daughter. Arthur didn't even flinch. My solution, he said, is to ensure that this family does what it needs to do. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Then I spoke. Dad, I said evenly, The first rule of the military is that we never abandon our teammates. He frowned slightly. I met his eyes. You're sure you want me on that operating table? Arthur's patience finally snapped. Yes, he barked. The word echoed slightly in the large room. Tomorrow night, he said, you will go to Charlotte's clinic and you will cooperate with the procedure. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I smiled. Just a small one. Understood, I said. I stood up and adjusted my uniform jacket. Arthur relaxed slightly clearly, believing the conversation had ended the way he wanted. You're making the right decision, he said. I nodded politely. Inside the recording device, hidden in my uniform, every word he had just spoken was preserved in perfect audio clarity. Arthur thought he had just used military authority to force a disobedient daughter back into line. He had no idea the order he just gave would read perfectly in a federal indictment for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. I closed the front door of my apartment and locked it behind me. Tomorrow night was supposed to be surgery day. Charlotte's surgical team believed I would arrive sedated, cooperative, and legally authorized for organ extraction. According to their internal files, I was already listed as a brain-dead donor. My liver had been assigned to a billionaire defense contractor, who apparently valued survival more than ethics. The only thing still missing from the transaction was the money, $1.5 million, advance payment. The rest would arrive after the procedure. I poured a cup of black coffee and sat down in front of the workstation on my kitchen table. The laptop was connected to a secure military network through a portable encrypted terminal. The room was quiet, just the hum of electronics and the faint noise of traffic outside the window. On the screen, a live financial monitoring system displayed several accounts linked to Charlotte's clinic. Multiple international transfers were already queued: shell companies, medical consulting payments, private surgical agreements. The system was complicated enough to look legitimate, but underneath the layers of paperwork, everything pointed to the same thing: black market organ sales. The largest pending transaction was scheduled to process in about 20 minutes. Sender Zurich Private Banking Group. Recipient Hastings Medical Solutions. Amount $1,500,000 US. I checked the clock, right on schedule. Across the city, Charlotte and her business partner were probably sitting inside the clinic's office waiting for the money to clear. Dr. Leonard Gordon, licensed transplant surgeon, highly respected, also apparently willing to carve up veterans for private clients. I opened the live security feed from the clinic. The building cameras were connected to a local network that Charlotte clearly believed was secure. It wasn't. Two video windows appeared on my screen. The first showed Charlotte pacing inside a glass-walled office. She had changed out of the Burberry coat and was now wearing a white lab coat over an expensive black dress. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her phone was glued to her ear. The second camera showed Dr. Gordon sitting at a desk in front of a computer. He looked impatient. His finger tapped the desk while he waited for the transfer notification. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of coffee. Then I opened the financial command window. One command line blinked quietly on the screen, the same one I had hovered over yesterday. Freeze global assets. I typed a single authorization string. The system asked for confirmation. I entered my credentials. Biometric authentication followed. Then the screen paused for a moment. Processing request. Global banking networks are surprisingly efficient when federal task forces get involved. Within seconds, the command executed. Across the world, multiple financial accounts linked to the billionaire contractor froze simultaneously. The system displayed the result. Assets locked, international transaction blocks activated, monitoring enabled. I closed the window and switched back to the clinic cameras. Dr. Gordon's computer screen changed. A notification appeared. Incoming transfer request. He smiled slightly and reached for the keyboard. Charlotte stopped pacing and walked over to stand beside him. Finally, she said. Gordon clicked the confirmation window. Accept transfer. For half a second, nothing happened. Then his screen flashed red. An alert box appeared. Transaction rejected. Account access suspended. Gordon frowned and tried again. Same result. The screen flashed red a second time. A new message appeared. He leaned closer to read it. Charlotte crossed her arms impatiently. What's wrong? Gordon clicked another button. Instead of a confirmation page, a secure banking interface opened automatically. An incoming call request appeared on the screen. He answered it. A woman's voice spoke through the computer speakers. Cold, professional, emotionless. Dr. Gordon, this is Zurich Private Banking. Yes, Gordon said quickly. We are waiting for a transfer confirmation. A short pause followed. Your accounts have been frozen, the woman said. The room went silent. Gordon blinked. I'm sorry, what your accounts were frozen 15 minutes ago, under a federal financial investigation order. Charlotte stepped closer to the desk. That's impossible, she snapped. The banker's voice did not change. All assets associated with this account holder have been temporarily locked pending review by a federal task force. Gordon's face went pale. There must be some mistake, he said. I'm afraid the order is already active. Charlotte grabbed Gordon's shoulder. Ask them what agency, she whispered. Gordon cleared his throat. Which task force issued the order? Another pause. Federal Financial Crimes Division operating under joint authority. Then the line disconnected. The office fell completely quiet. Charlotte stared at the dark screen. For a moment she didn't move. Then the panic started. She began pacing again, faster this time. This is Treasury interference, she muttered. Some firewall issue. She grabbed her phone and started dialing. Across the city, I watched her through the security camera. She chewed on one of her fingernails so hard that a thin line of blood appeared near the cuticle. Gordon tried accessing the account again, still locked. Charlotte dialed another number. Arthur, I couldn't hear the full conversation, but her tone was sharp and frantic. Something's wrong with the transfer, she said. Gordon leaned back in his chair. What if the client pulls out, he asked. Charlotte stopped pacing. Her eyes hardened. He won't, she said. How do you know? Because he's dying. She looked down at her phone and started typing. My monitoring system picked up the outgoing message immediately. The text didn't travel through a normal cell network. Charlotte's clinic used an encrypted medical communication platform for internal coordination. Unfortunately for her, that network was also connected to the system I was currently watching. The message appeared on my screen. Charlotte, we need to move faster. Kill her tonight. Harvest the organs and deliver them to the VIP for cash. I read it once, then I archived the message as evidence. Across the city, Charlotte slammed her phone down on the desk. This is just a temporary banking delay, she said. Gordon looked less convinced. What if it isn't? Charlotte's voice dropped. Then we stop waiting for the transfer. She looked directly at him. We take the organs tonight. I leaned back in my chair and watched the office through the camera. Charlotte believed the banking system had simply malfunctioned. She believed accelerating the surgery would save her operation. She had no idea that the moment she sent that message, the evidence file against her became airtight. They were blaming slow banks and government firewalls for their problems. They thought rushing the operation would rescue their empire. They didn't realize the surgical blade hadn't even touched my skin yet, and their conviction was already signed. I watched the clinic cameras until the sky outside my apartment window turned dark. Charlotte moved fast after the bank accounts froze. She called several numbers. She spoke to Gordon twice. At one point, she disappeared into the surgical wing and came back out wearing scrubs. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just logistics. By the time the clock reached 8 in the evening, I already knew what was coming next. Right on schedule, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. Major Hastings, I said. A man's voice responded. Calm, professional, private medical transport. We're outside your building. Of course they were. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. An ambulance sat near the curb. Not a military vehicle, not a hospital unit, private service. 2 paramedics waited beside it. Charlotte didn't trust me to show up voluntarily. Smart, I grabbed a small overnight bag from the table. Inside it were exactly 3 things: a change of clothes, a compact medical kit, and a small encrypted transmitter. I slipped the transmitter into the lining of my sleeve before heading downstairs. The night air outside was cold and quiet. One of the paramedics stepped forward when he saw me. Major Hastings, he asked. That's me. He opened the back doors of the ambulance. Dr. Charlotte requested we bring you directly to the clinic. I nodded and climbed inside. The door shut behind me. The ambulance started moving. Neither paramedic said much during the ride. They checked a few routine vitals and filled out paperwork on a tablet. From their perspective, this was probably just another late-night medical transfer. The city lights slid past the small windows as we drove across town. About 15 minutes later, the ambulance pulled into the underground garage of Charlotte's clinic. The building looked quiet from the outside. Inside was a different story. Bright lights, staff moving through hallways, surgical equipment already prepared. They weren't waiting for tomorrow anymore. Tonight was the night. The paramedics escorted me upstairs to the pre-operative recovery area. A nurse handed me a hospital gown. "Change into this," she said. I did. 10 minutes later, I was lying on a narrow hospital bed under bright surgical lighting. Monitors beeped beside me. A blood pressure cuff wrapped around my arm. Everything looked exactly like a normal surgical preparation, except nothing about tonight was normal. The door opened. Charlotte walked in. She was wearing blue surgical scrubs and a disposable cap now. Her makeup was gone. Her expression looked focused and impatient. Behind her stood Dr. Gordon. He gave me a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Charlotte stepped closer to the bed, holding a small plastic cup filled with clear liquid. "Good evening, Valerie," she said. Her voice sounded almost cheerful. I looked at the cup. "What is that?" I asked. "Just a sedative," she replied. "It'll help you relax before the procedure." I sat up slightly. "What procedure?" Charlotte gave a short laugh. "You always ask too many questions." She handed me the cup. "Drink it," she said. "You'll feel much better." The smell of the liquid was faint but familiar. Scopolamine, strong sedative, fast-acting. In the wrong dose, it could knock someone out for hours. Or permanently. I looked at Charlotte. "You're very invested in my comfort tonight," I said. She smiled. "Family takes care of family." I held her gaze for another second. Then I raised the cup to my lips. Charlotte watched closely. So did Gordon. I tilted my head back and pretended to swallow. What actually happened was slightly different. Inside the sleeve of my gown was a small medical sponge. Every drop of the liquid went straight into it. I lowered the empty cup. Charlotte studied my face carefully. "Good girl," she said. "The sedative should have taken effect within seconds." So I closed my eyes. My body relaxed slowly against the bed. My breathing slowed. Then I let my head roll slightly to the side. Charlotte waited a moment longer. "Valerie," she said. I didn't respond. She looked at Gordon. "See," she said. "Easy." They began preparing the equipment around the bed. Surgical trays rolled into place. Monitoring wires attached to my chest. Gordon checked the screen beside the bed. The heart monitor displayed my pulse. 75 beats per minute, then 72, then 68, a steady decline, exactly the way a sedated patient would appear. That part required a little preparation earlier in the evening. While the nurse stepped out to gather supplies, I had quietly accessed the monitor's network port. Hospital devices are surprisingly easy to modify if you know where to look. The system now displayed a slow decrease in vital signs. Charlotte stood beside the bed and looked down at me. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she brushed a strand of hair away from my forehead. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You were always the disappointing one," she said. Gordon glanced over but didn't interrupt. Charlotte leaned closer. "Everyone thought you were smart because you wore a uniform," she continued. "But you're just a glorified office clerk." Her fingers slid through my hair again. "At least now your organs will finally be useful." Gordon chuckled quietly. Charlotte smiled. "Do you know what a liver transplant like yours is worth?" she asked softly. She didn't wait for an answer. "Enough to buy a yacht." My body stayed completely still. My breathing remained slow and even. On the monitor beside the bed, the numbers continued dropping. 65, 62, Charlotte straightened up. "Let's move her," she said. Gordon nodded and reached for the surgical tray. Under the blanket covering my body, my right hand moved slightly, just enough for my finger to find the small transmitter hidden against the mattress. A tiny device, no larger than a coin. One press activated the emergency signal. The transmitter connected directly to a secure tactical network operated by federal response teams. I pressed the button. The signal left the building instantly. Charlotte believed I had just slipped into unconsciousness. She thought the sedative had worked perfectly. She had no idea that the quiet moment she was enjoying beside the bed had just triggered a tactical alert. From her perspective, I was drifting into permanent sleep. In reality, the silence in that room had just activated a SWAT team that was already surrounding the entire building. My fingers stayed pressed against the transmitter for exactly 1 second before I let my hand go still again under the blanket. The device vibrated once. Signal confirmed. Then it went quiet. From the outside, nothing in the room had changed. The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm. Charlotte and Gordon moved around the surgical table with calm efficiency. Stainless steel instruments rested neatly on trays beside them. To them, everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Upstairs, the front doors of the clinic opened. A black SUV pulled into the entrance circle outside the building. Then another, and another, 3 vehicles in total. The first one stopped directly in front of the glass doors. A large man in a dark suit stepped out and scanned the street before opening the rear passenger door. The man who emerged from the car moved slowly. Older, expensive suit. The kind of watch that costs more than most people's houses. Victor Halperin, defense contractor, billionaire, client. 2 more security men stepped out of the other vehicles and positioned themselves near the entrance. Inside the clinic lobby, my father was already waiting. General Arthur Hastings stood near the reception desk with his back straight and a polite smile that looked very different from the one he used in press conferences. Beside him stood my mother, Evelyn. She clutched a small designer handbag with both hands and looked nervous. The moment Halperin stepped inside, Arthur moved forward to greet him. "Mr. Halperin," he said warmly. Halperin shook his hand slowly. "General," he replied. His voice carried the relaxed confidence of someone used to buying whatever he wanted. Arthur gestured toward the waiting area. "Please come in," he said. "Everything is ready." Halperin looked around the clinic lobby with mild curiosity. "Your daughter runs a very impressive operation," he said. Arthur smiled proudly. "Yes, Charlotte has always been the successful one." Evelyn forced a small laugh beside him. One of Halperin's bodyguards remained near the entrance, while the other stood quietly behind the billionaire. Halperin sat down in one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. Arthur sat across from him. "My medical team tells me the compatibility results are excellent," Halperin said casually. Arthur nodded. "They are." Halperin leaned back slightly. "Your daughter," he said. "The donor." Arthur didn't hesitate. "She understands the importance of sacrifice." Halperin smiled. "That's admirable." Arthur raised his chin slightly. "The success of our family has always depended on discipline and loyalty." Halperin studied him for a moment. "You're offering a remarkable gift, General." Arthur's voice was steady. "The health of an important national defense partner is a worthy cause." Halperin chuckled softly. "Your daughter is a wonderful contribution to my recovery." Arthur nodded once. "The sacrifice will be an honor for our family." Upstairs, polite conversation filled the waiting room. Downstairs in the surgical wing, Gordon adjusted the overhead light above the operating table. The bright beam focused directly on my abdomen. Charlotte stood beside him, reviewing the final chart. "She's stable," Gordon said, glancing at the monitor. The numbers on the screen continued their slow decline. Heart rate 60, blood pressure dropping gradually. Exactly the way a sedated patient should look. Charlotte nodded. "Good." She pulled on a pair of surgical gloves. The latex snapped lightly around her wrists. "Let's not waste time," she said. Gordon picked up a scalpel from the instrument tray. The blade reflected the surgical light. He stepped closer to the table. My eyes remained closed. My breathing stayed slow and even. Charlotte moved to the opposite side of the table. "Once we begin," she said quietly. "We have about 40 minutes before the tissue must be transferred." Gordon nodded. "I know the procedure." Charlotte leaned slightly over my body. "Goodbye, Valerie," she said softly. Upstairs, Halperin checked his watch. Arthur leaned forward slightly. "Everything should begin shortly," he said. Halperin smiled. "I've waited 2 years for a compatible liver," he replied. "A few more minutes won't hurt." Back in the operating room, Gordon raised the scalpel. He positioned the blade above the surgical marker line Charlotte had drawn earlier across my abdomen. The room was completely silent. Then my right hand moved. Fast. Before Gordon could react, my fingers closed around his wrist. The movement was sharp and controlled. The kind of movement drilled into military training until it becomes automatic. Gordon gasped. My grip tightened. I twisted his arm backward. The scalpel flew from his hand and clattered across the stainless steel floor. Charlotte froze. My eyes opened. Fully alert, fully focused. No sedation, no confusion, just calm. Gordon stared down at me in disbelief. "That's not possible," he stammered. I sat up slowly on the operating table while still holding his wrist locked behind his back. "You're aiming at the wrong location, doctor," I said quietly. Charlotte's face drained of color. "You drank the sedative," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "You should never trust a patient who grew up around military medics." Gordon tried to pull his arm free. "Bad decision." I twisted a little harder. He winced and dropped to one knee beside the table. Charlotte took a step back. She started. I released Gordon and slid off the operating table. The cold floor felt solid under my feet. Charlotte looked toward the door. For a moment she seemed ready to run. But something stopped her. Footsteps. Heavy ones. From the main entrance upstairs. Gordon slowly turned his head toward the hallway leading out of the operating wing. His face turned pale. The color drained so quickly it was almost impressive. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring toward the clinic entrance. Gordon's face shifted from pink to gray in seconds. But the real terror in his eyes wasn't because his patient had just woken up. It was because of what was walking through the front doors of the clinic. The fluorescent lights in the surgical hallway flickered slightly as I pushed the operating room door open. Behind me, Gordon was still on the floor, holding his wrist, and staring like he had just watched a ghost climb off the table. Charlotte stood frozen beside the surgical tray, her brain trying to process how a sedated patient had just stood up and walked away. I didn't wait for them to catch up. I stepped into the hallway and walked toward the main lobby. Halfway down the corridor, a black tactical vest hung inside an open supply locker. It had been placed there earlier that evening by someone who understood the schedule perfectly. I picked it up and slid it over the hospital gown. Across the chest, white block letters read CID, Criminal Investigation Division. The vest fit exactly the way it was supposed to, because it was mine. I tightened the straps, adjusted the shoulder panels, and continued walking. Behind me, I heard Charlotte finally find her voice. Valerie. Her footsteps rushed into the hallway. You can't leave, she shouted. I kept walking. The corridor opened into the main waiting area of the clinic. Bright lights, marble floors, expensive furniture meant to reassure wealthy clients that they were in safe hands. My father stood near the center of the room. Across from him sat Victor Halperin and 2 of his bodyguards. My mother sat nearby, clutching a glass of wine. Everyone turned when the operating room doors swung open behind me. For a second, nobody moved. I stepped into the lobby wearing the black CID vest. Charlotte burst out of the hallway behind me. Her face twisted with shock the moment she saw what I was wearing. What the hell are you doing? She screamed. Her voice echoed across the lobby. The security guards near the entrance shifted slightly but didn't move yet. Charlotte pointed at me. Security, grab her. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Grab that crazy woman. One of Halperin's bodyguards glanced toward his employer. Halperin didn't move. He was studying me with quiet interest. My father stepped forward. His face was turning red. Valerie, he snapped. The tone he used was the same one he used on junior officers who had just made a serious mistake. Return to the operating room immediately. I stopped in the center of the lobby. Arthur took another step closer. You are out of line, he barked. The words echoed across the marble floor. Get back on that table. Charlotte's breathing had become uneven. This is ridiculous, she said. She looked toward the security guards again. Are you idiots deaf? Detain her? The guards still didn't move. Arthur's voice rose another level. Valerie, he said, each word sharp and precise. You are a commissioned officer in the United States Army. Disobeying a medical directive in an active procedure can be considered insubordination. I looked at him calmly. He pointed toward the hallway behind me. Return to surgery now. My mother finally stood up. What is happening? She asked nervously. Charlotte grabbed the glass of wine from the table beside her and took a quick drink. Her hand was shaking slightly. Then the front doors of the clinic opened. Everyone in the lobby turned toward the entrance. A group of men walked in, not doctors, not patients, military, dark suits, military posture, quiet confidence. At the center of the group was an older man with silver hair and 4 stars on the shoulders of his uniform. 4-star General, Pentagon Command Authority. Arthur's expression changed instantly. For a brief moment, he looked confused. Then he stepped forward. Sir Arthur said. The 4-star general didn't even look at him. He walked straight past Arthur without slowing down. Arthur turned slightly clearly, expecting some kind of recognition. None came. The man crossed the lobby and stopped directly in front of me. The room went silent. Charlotte's glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound echoed sharply. The general stood tall and studied me for 1 second. Then he snapped his heels together and saluted. Director, he said. His voice was calm and precise. The perimeter is secure. Arthur blinked. What? The general continued speaking. Federal agents are in position at all exits. His eyes never left mine. FBI tactical teams have the building surrounded. The lobby felt colder all of a sudden. Charlotte's mouth opened slightly. What are you talking about? She whispered. The general lowered his salute. Your command, ma'am, he said. Arthur looked between the two of us like someone who had just realized he had walked into the wrong war. What command, he demanded. The general ignored him. He leaned slightly closer to me. The net is closed, he said quietly. Then he stepped back to attention, awaiting your order. Charlotte stared at me like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. You can't be in charge here, she said. Her voice sounded smaller now. Arthur finally found his voice again. Valerie, he said slowly. What is this? I looked around the room. Charlotte, Arthur, my mother. Victor Halperin sitting calmly in the chair, watching everything unfold like he had just paid for front-row tickets. Then I looked back at the four-star general standing in front of me. The building was surrounded, every exit covered, every conversation recorded. The operation had been running long before Charlotte ever brought those papers into my hospital room. I straightened my vest and looked at the general. Proceed, I said. The word left my mouth quietly. Proceed. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the building exploded into motion. The front glass doors shattered inward as the first team moved. Black tactical uniforms filled the entrance, rifles up, controlled movements, no yelling, no dramatic speeches, just professional law enforcement doing their job. Red laser sights swept across the lobby. Federal agents, someone announced sharply, everyone on the ground. The sound of boots hit the marble floor from multiple directions. Agents flooded through the front entrance, the side corridors, and the stairwells. Several more moved down the hallway toward the surgical wing, where Gordon was still standing in shock. Victor Halperin didn't resist. He slowly raised both hands and leaned back in his chair. One of his bodyguards reached for something under his jacket. 3 laser dots landed on his chest instantly. Don't, an FBI agent said calmly. The guard froze. Arthur stood in the center of the room like a statue. What is this? He demanded. Nobody answered him. 2 agents moved past him and secured Halperin and both of his security men in less than 10 seconds. Plastic cuffs snapped tight. Across the lobby, Charlotte finally found her voice again. This is illegal, she shouted. Her eyes darted between the agents and the 4-star general standing beside me. You can't storm a private medical facility. 2 CID agents stepped forward. Charlotte Hastings, one of them said. She backed away immediately. You have no authority here. They didn't slow down. The agent continued speaking. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, illegal organ trafficking, medical fraud, and multiple violations of federal transplant law. Charlotte laughed nervously. This is ridiculous, she said. You have nothing. Right on cue, the large television mounted on the lobby wall flickered. The screen switched from the clinic's promotional slideshow to a live data feed. Rows of financial records appeared. Offshore bank transfers, shell corporations, consulting payments that didn't match any legitimate medical service. The entire black market transaction network was now displayed in clean, organized charts. Charlotte's accounts, Gordon's payments, Halperin's deposits, Arthur's gambling debts. The room went completely quiet. Charlotte turned toward the screen slowly. That's fake, she said. Her voice sounded thin now. The display changed again. Audio playback began. Charlotte's voice filled the room through the speakers. We need to move faster. Kill her tonight. Harvest the organs and deliver them to the VIP for cash. The recording echoed across the marble walls. Her own words. Unedited, unmistakable. Charlotte's face went white. One of the CID agents grabbed her wrist and twisted her arms behind her back. She struggled immediately. You can't do this, she screamed. Cold steel handcuffs snapped around her wrists. The sound echoed sharply in the room. Down the hallway, Gordon tried to slip toward the surgical wing exit. 2 agents intercepted him before he reached the door. He barely managed 1 step before he was slammed face first against the wall. His arms were pulled behind his back. Another pair of cuffs clicked shut. The entire operation had taken less than 30 seconds. No shouting, no chaos, just efficient arrests. My mother stood frozen near the couch staring at the screen. The financial data changed again. Arthur's name appeared. Outstanding debt records. $3 million. Creditor Victor Halperin. The timeline showed the exact moment the debt appeared and the moment Charlotte scheduled my surgery. Arthur's jaw tightened. You hacked private records, he said angrily. The 4-star general beside me spoke for the first time. No, he said calmly. We collected evidence. Arthur turned toward him. You are making a mistake. The general didn't even blink. Arthur's eyes moved to me. Valerie, he said. For the first time that night, his voice sounded uncertain. "Stop this." I didn't move. Agents continued securing the scene. Evidence technicians entered the lobby carrying sealed containers and digital record units. Charlotte was forced to her knees on the marble floor beside Gordon. Her hair had fallen loose from the surgical cap. Her face looked completely different now. No confidence, no control, just panic. Arthur suddenly moved. He stepped toward me quickly. "Valerie," he barked. Two agents shifted slightly, but I raised my hand. They stopped. Arthur stood directly in front of me now. "You work for the government," he said. His voice was sharp again, but something underneath it sounded desperate. "You have authority here." He pointed toward Charlotte. "Fix this." Charlotte looked up at him from the floor. Dad Arthur raised his hand. "Valerie," he continued, "I am giving you a direct order." The old command voice had returned. "Release your sister." The entire lobby watched the exchange. Arthur stepped closer. "You are still my daughter," he said. "You will not destroy this family." I reached into the inside pocket of the tactical vest. Arthur watched carefully. For a moment, he probably believed I was about to pull out some kind of authorization document. What I pulled out instead was a single sheet of paper, the same document Charlotte had taken from my hospital room. The organ donation authorization form. My signature still glowed faintly under the forensic tracer. I held it up for Arthur to see. Then I tossed it directly against his chest. The paper slid down and landed on the marble floor between us. Arthur looked down at it, confused. I spoke quietly. "I'm just following the proper procedure for medical waste recovery," I said. Then I looked him directly in the eye. "General, 3 months passed faster than I expected. Federal investigations move slowly when they start. But once the evidence becomes overwhelming, the rest of the process tends to accelerate." Charlotte's clinic never reopened. 2 weeks after the raid, the Department of the Treasury seized the building along with every account connected to Hastings Medical Solutions. The lobby that once hosted wealthy transplant clients now sat behind federal evidence tape while investigators cataloged equipment and medical records. Dr. Gordon accepted a plea deal within 14 days. Apparently, facing life in federal prison makes surgeons reconsider their loyalty. He gave prosecutors everything: patient records, transaction logs, names of brokers who arranged illegal donors, and the internal communication system Charlotte believed was encrypted. That last part helped the most. Her message about harvesting my organs for cash became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The trial itself didn't last long. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Charlotte Hastings was convicted on multiple federal charges: illegal organ trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, medical fraud, and criminal racketeering. The judge sentenced her to 25 years offers in federal prison. No possibility of early release. Dr. Gordon received 12 years under the plea agreement. Victor Halperin's legal team tried everything they could think of: expensive lawyers, procedural delays, jurisdiction arguments. None of it worked. Financial records tend to speak clearly. Halperin was charged with illegal medical procurement and conspiracy. His trial was still pending when I last checked the case file. My father's downfall was handled differently. Military court. Arthur Hastings had spent 40 years building a career inside the Army. Decorations, command positions, advisory roles at the Pentagon. All of it disappeared in a single afternoon. The court-martial stripped him of his rank. 4 stars removed. Pension revoked. Official record amended to reflect conduct unbecoming an officer and conspiracy in a civilian criminal enterprise. The military doesn't like officers who sell their own family members to pay gambling debts. Arthur was transferred into federal custody to await sentencing. The prosecutors recommended 15 years. The news channels covered the story for about a week. Then something newer replaced it. That's usually how public scandals end, quietly. 3 months after the raid, I drove to a federal correctional facility in Virginia. The building looked exactly like every other federal prison I had visited during investigations. Tall fences, security towers, gray concrete walls that didn't bother pretending to look welcoming. The guard at the entrance checked my identification and directed me to the visitor area. The room contained a row of thick glass partitions separating visitors from inmates. Each station had 2 chairs and a telephone. I sat down at one of them. A few minutes later, the door on the other side opened. Charlotte walked in first. Her hair was shorter now. Prison uniforms are designed to remove personality from a person. The gray fabric did exactly that. She sat down slowly behind the glass. Our eyes met. For a moment she didn't speak. Then the door opened again. Arthur stepped into the room. No uniform, no medals. Just a prison-issued shirt and the posture of a man who had spent his life giving orders and suddenly had none left. My mother came last. Evelyn sat down beside Charlotte and immediately began crying. The guard signaled for them to pick up the phones. I lifted mine. Evelyn's voice reached me through the line. "Valerie," she said. Her voice sounded fragile. "We're still your family," I didn't answer. She wiped tears from her eyes. "You have to understand," she continued. "Things got complicated. Complicated." That was an interesting word for attempted murder. Charlotte watched me quietly. Her expression was different from the last time I saw her in the clinic lobby. Less anger, more calculation. Arthur didn't speak at all. He simply watched me the way officers watch a soldier who has made an unexpected move on the battlefield. Evelyn leaned closer to the glass. "You could help us," she said. "You have connections, authority." Her voice cracked. "Whatever happened, we're still blood." The word hung in the air for a few seconds. Blood, family, the same argument Arthur used in the living room that night. I looked at the three of them sitting behind the glass. Charlotte, Arthur, Evelyn, the people who had decided that my liver was worth $3 million. I felt something while looking at them, but it wasn't anger, and it definitely wasn't satisfaction. It was something quieter, distance. The kind you feel when a chapter of your life closes permanently. I spoke into the phone. "Blood doesn't give you permission to hold a scalpel over my body," I said calmly. Evelyn's shoulders shook as she cried. "And the word family," I continued, "is not a credit card you use to pay gambling debts." Arthur finally reacted. His jaw tightened slightly. Charlotte stared at the table. No one spoke after that. I stood up from the chair and hung the phone back on the wall. Evelyn started saying my name again through the glass. I didn't look back. The guard opened the exit door for me. Outside, the sunlight was bright. My uniform jacket felt warm against my shoulders as I walked across the parking lot. Behind me, 3 people sat inside a prison building they would not be leaving for a very long time. Not because I put them there, because they put themselves there. Before I got in the car, I turned toward the camera for a moment and asked the one question that still matters. If the people who share your blood are willing to destroy you for money, do you think they still deserve a place in your life, or would you walk away and never look back? Tell me what you would do. And if you want to hear more stories about justice, loyalty, and the moment someone finally stops letting their family control their life, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. 3 weeks after the prison visit, I went back to work. Not the dramatic kind of work people imagine when they hear the words federal investigation. Most days were quiet. Reports, briefings, long meetings inside rooms with no windows. The kind of routine that feels almost boring after everything that happened. But boring can be a good thing. Boring means no one is trying to sell your organs. Boring means your life belongs to you again. One afternoon, I was sitting alone in my office, finishing a report about the Charlotte case. The file was thick, hundreds of pages of evidence, financial records, witness statements. When you put it all together on paper, the story looks less dramatic than people think. It becomes numbers, dates, transactions, decisions, and every decision eventually leads somewhere. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. That's when I realized something important. People think the hardest part of a situation like mine is the betrayal. It isn't. The hardest part is accepting that the betrayal was real. For a long time, even after I discovered the documents in that hospital room, a part of me still wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe Charlotte was being manipulated. Maybe my father didn't know the full plan. Maybe things had simply gotten out of control. That kind of thinking is normal. Because when the people hurting you are your own family, your brain tries to protect itself by rewriting the story. But facts don't care about emotional comfort. The facts were simple. My sister built a business selling human organs. My father approved the deal because it solved his financial problem. And my body happened to be the easiest solution available. Once I accepted that truth, something strange happened. The anger disappeared. Not immediately, but gradually. Because anger requires a connection to the people who hurt you. And eventually that connection fades. I still get messages from people who watch the news coverage of the case. Some of them ask the same question: how could your own family do that to you? The honest answer is simple. because they wanted something more than they wanted me to be safe. Money, status, control. Whatever the motivation is, people reveal their priorities when pressure appears. And pressure always appears eventually. That's the first lesson I took from everything that happened. Pay attention to what people choose when the stakes are high, not what they say, not what they promise, what they actually choose. If someone chooses money over your safety, believe that choice the first time. Another lesson came from the moment I decided not to confront Charlotte in the hospital. A lot of people ask why I didn't expose her immediately. The answer is strategy. Emotional reactions might feel satisfying in the moment, but they rarely solve the real problem. If I had accused Charlotte that night, she would have denied everything, destroyed evidence, disappeared. Instead, I waited, collected proof, built a case that could not be ignored. Sometimes justice requires patience, and patience is not weakness, it's preparation. Another thing people misunderstand is the idea of forgiveness. After the trial, several reporters asked whether I plan to forgive my family. It's an interesting question, but it's also the wrong one. Forgiveness is a personal choice. Sometimes it helps people move forward. Sometimes it doesn't change anything. What matters more is distance. Distance gives you space to rebuild your life without the constant influence of people who harmed you. And rebuilding is the part no one talks about. After the investigation ended, my life didn't magically become perfect. There were still quiet mornings when I woke up thinking about the moment Charlotte stood over that operating table. There were still days when seeing my father's name in a report made my stomach tighten. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to keep moving without carrying the weight of someone else's decisions. Eventually, those memories lose their power. They become chapters instead of anchors. One evening last month, I was having dinner with a few colleagues from the investigation team. Someone joked that I should write a book about the whole situation. Another agent laughed and said the story sounded too unrealistic for anyone to believe. Maybe he's right. But the truth is simpler than most people think. Situations like mine happen because small ethical compromises grow into larger ones. A lie becomes a habit becomes a system, and before anyone notices, the system starts hurting people. That's the final lesson I learned. Pay attention to the small decisions in your life, because those small decisions eventually shape everything else. When dinner ended that night, I walked out into the cool evening air and looked up at the sky over Washington. The city lights were bright enough to hide most of the stars, but that didn't bother me. For the first time in a long while, the future felt simple, not easy, just clear. My family's story ended behind the walls of a federal prison. Mine didn't. And before I leave you with that thought, I want to ask you something. If the people closest to you tried to control your life, your career, or even your body for their own benefit, would you keep calling that loyalty? Or would you draw the line and walk away? Think about that. And if this story made you reflect on your own boundaries, your own relationships, and the kind of life you want to protect, stay with us. Because sometimes the most important battles you fight in life aren't against strangers. They're against the people who believe they own you. A few months ago, someone asked me a question that stayed in my head longer than I expected. We were finishing a training session at the office. The room was almost empty, just a few of us packing up our laptops and notes. One of the younger agents walked over and said, "Major, can I ask you something personal?" I told him to go ahead. He hesitated for a second, then said, "How did you know when to stop treating them like family?" It was a simple question, but the answer isn't simple, because most people grow up hearing the same message over and over again. Family comes first. Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water. Those ideas sound good in theory, and sometimes they're true, but not always. I thought about his question for a moment before answering. Family stops being family, I told him, when they stop seeing you as a human being. That's the line most people struggle to recognize. Because betrayal inside a family doesn't usually start with something dramatic. It starts with small things, a lie here, a manipulation there, someone using guilt to get what they want, someone reminding you how much you owe them. At first it feels uncomfortable but manageable, then it becomes normal. And before you realize it, the relationship stops being about love and starts being about control. Looking back now, I can see the early warning signs in my own life. Charlotte always wanted more recognition, more money, more control over every situation. When we were younger, that ambition looked impressive. Successful people are often ambitious, but ambition without limits eventually becomes exploitation. And people like Charlotte rarely stop on their own. They stop when someone forces them to. That's another uncomfortable truth. Many destructive people in our lives keep pushing boundaries because nobody has ever stopped them. Everyone around them chooses the easier path. Silence, compliance, avoiding conflict. I understand why people do that. Conflict is uncomfortable. Standing up to someone powerful inside your own family can feel almost impossible. But avoiding conflict doesn't remove the problem. It just delays the moment when the problem becomes unavoidable. In my case, that moment happened in a hospital room with a stack of papers and a pen. But the real decision wasn't about signing the document. The real decision happened earlier. It happened the moment I realized that protecting my own life mattered more than protecting the illusion of a perfect family. That's the boundary that changed everything. A boundary is a simple concept. It means deciding what behavior you will not accept in your life, not arguing about it, not negotiating it, just deciding. The challenge is that people who benefit from crossing your boundaries rarely respect them. They push harder, they try new strategies, they accuse you of being selfish or ungrateful. They may even say you're betraying the family, but protecting yourself is not betrayal, it's survival. Another thing I learned after everything that happened is that boundaries don't require anger. A lot of people imagine that standing up for yourself means shouting, fighting, or proving someone wrong. It doesn't. The most powerful boundary I ever set was the quietest one. Walking out of that prison visiting room without looking back. No speech. No dramatic confrontation, just a decision. That's something people rarely talk about. Closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from distance. Distance gives you the space to rebuild your life without constant interference from people who want to control it. And rebuilding is possible. It takes time, but it happens. The younger agent who asked me that question nodded slowly after I finished explaining. Then he said something interesting. So the real victory wasn't putting them in prison. I shook my head. No, I said. The real victory was realizing I didn't belong in their version of family anymore. That realization gives you freedom. Freedom to build new relationships. Freedom to decide what kind of life you want. Freedom to define loyalty on your own terms instead of inheriting someone else's definition. Before we finished packing up our equipment, he asked one more question. What if someone still feels guilty for walking away? That one, I answered quickly. Guilt is normal, I said. But guilt doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. Sometimes guilt is just the leftover weight of expectations that were never fair to begin with. And eventually that weight disappears too. These days my life is quiet. Work, training, the occasional investigation, nothing dramatic. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of life I want now. Peace doesn't come from winning every fight. Peace comes from knowing which fights are worth having in the first place. Before I end this story, I want to leave you with one final thought. If someone in your life demands loyalty while offering none in return, that isn't family, that's control. And the moment you recognize the difference might be the moment your life finally starts moving in the right direction. So I'll ask you the same question that young agent asked me. Where would you draw the line? And if you've ever had to choose between protecting your family or protecting yourself? I'd really like to hear what you decided. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this help you think about boundaries, loyalty, and the kind of life you want to protect, make sure you subscribe and stay with us for more conversations like this.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.